So my name's Lorraine, and I'm from South Africa. I live in Cape Town, and just happened to run into Marco at a conference up in Johannesburg earlier this year, and he was like, "Yeah, you should, come talk at KanDDDinsky." And I was like, "What is KanDDDinsky?" But here we are. So yeah, it's really exciting, and it's my first visit to Berlin. So it's all in around. It's been great being here. My day job is that I run a software development company, but I still tend to self-describe as a developer, and that's where my passion is, that's what interests me. But along with that goes looking at how, as IT professionals, how do we get better at what we do? And I think that's why we're here for DDD. We're saying we could design better. So systems thinking for me is a little bit of an umbrella topic. It says that how do we sometimes look broader than just the specific little part of the problem we're working in, right? So I hope you can see how this will flow into DDD and have some fun with me. The first thing about systems is that they use our intuitive brain. So we actually all understand things like a tree as a system, right? Leaves get sun, and tree grows, and roots get water, and it's a whole system. We don't always understand exactly every piece of it, but we grow up with systems. So what happens in our professional lives is that we start working things out by decomposing them, really. We analyze them into smaller and smaller pieces, and then potentially we lose track of the bigger picture. So there's all sorts of systems, and you can think of things like trees, you can think of your body as a system, you can think of a university as a system. And sometimes figuring out what is the goal of that system is the more difficult thing. So the other thing for me that is really, really exciting about systems is that systems thinking says that your problems are of your own making. Right? The system functions in a particular way because you designed it like that. You might not have meant to, okay, but you did. So, for instance, we can say big global economic things like the fact that there's poverty in our society. Do we want that? No, but somehow the systems that we have designed continue to cause some people to be rich and some people to live in poverty. In a corporate world, we could say that, do you ever lose, is it the competitor that drives you out of business? Or as a company, was it the fact that you weren't adaptable? And they just took the gap. So we make these opportunities by our own failures, right? Do we get the flu virus just because, the flu was coming past, or were we a bit run down and we were in a state that made that likely? So the nice thing about systems thinking, and the terrifying thing about systems thinking, is that it's something we can change. Let's have a look at what goes into it. So that you can think of systems thinking as an inverted triangle. The big visible bit of it at the top is the elements. So if I take my tree, I can see the leaves, I can see the branch. If I dig underground, I can see the roots and the trunk. And the elements are the bit that we as software developers love. They are our entities. Most of us get them immediately. Okay, we can, especially if you're a database type, you're already thinking the table structure, in your columns. So we tend to like this stuff. It's tangible. It can be, of course, an element of something like university might be learning, which is a little less tangible, but it's nonetheless an element. So they don't only have to be physical things. What gets more interesting are the interconnections. So in systems thinking, we try and figure out what affects what. How does information flow between things? So the tree, something happens when the temperature changes that a tree will start to lose its leaves. We're not always exactly sure what it is, but we can observe that. So there's some chemical transfer, there's some thing that's happening that says, it's autumn. The leaves turn brown and then fall off. Interesting, we're finding out things about trees, like when insects attack certain types of trees, they can actually harden the outside of the leaves and become more resistant. So they seem to send messages. We're getting the sense that somehow trees let other trees in the forest know there's a threat. Okay, wow. Soon won't even be safe to be a vegetarian if plants talk to one another. But the flows are more difficult to see, but with, observation, you can detect how things affect each other. The most difficult thing of a system is to figure out its purpose, because it's often not the stated purpose. I mean, our government might say something to us like, we really care about education, but then they spend more on military spending. So they don't. Or they really care about uplifting the poor, and they still spend more on military. They don't. So what we have to do is we have to detect the purpose you can only detect by observation. So if your company tells you that people are its most important resource, and they've already said the word resource, we can deduce things from that. All right, so you only understand what a system is really about by observing over time how it actually behaves. All right. So let's do a little bit of how do we diagram things. I'm jumping straight into diagramming because, systems thinking is about the pictures worth 1,000 words, right? So let's have a little bit of a language here for how do we draw and think about a system, how do we reduce it to some sort of model. And as we all know, a model of reality is not true, but it might be useful. So there we go. The basic things we have is the center box is a stock. So you would think about what is your stock in your system. And I've made a simple one, which is like a dam, some sort of reservoir. We have inflows, we have outflows, right? So we keep it simple. What causes our dam to fill up? It rains. Rivers bring water in. What causes it to get emptied? We have evaporation, and we use the water in some way. It leads off to the farms or the city or whatever we do. And the taps are really important. So the taps say it could rain more or it could rain less. So this is very relevant. I don't know how many people care about what goes on the southern tip of Africa, but we've just had a big drought in Cape Town where everybody was really, really scared about running out of water. So, and now suddenly your whole worldview changes because you look at simple things like flushing a toilet and you're going like, why are we doing this with drinking water? Right? And you start to look at how we design our life and we go, that was only because it was plentiful. So systems thinking is also often about scarcity, and looking for your constraints. Right. So that's the drawing side of it. It's fairly easy, right? What else did I want to tell you on that particular picture? That's pretty much it. Okay. So how do what do the taps do? What are the possible things that can go on when we're doing a diagram of a system's behavior? In the case of my little dam example, if we run dry, have we not got enough rain? Or are we using too much? So you can increase the stock by using less. It's not just the inflow that will increase your stock. Okay, so the taps work on both sides in terms of raising and lowering the stock level. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention on that one were the little clouds. They're vital, right? That is what is in context. So anything at the boundary in the cloud, we're kind of going, this doesn't affect us. And that's actually such an important decision, because where you draw your boundary defines what your problem is. If I say that my problem is the inflow from the rivers, I'm going to have to go all the way up the river. to start figuring out, somebody's drawing off where they didn't used to, new farms, new something, new factory. Right? And it's the same in our bounded contexts. We're trying to decide, where do we stop? What should be within the area we're dealing with. So I think this probably fits quite nicely for a lot of people. But yeah, the clouds are very important because they actually are how we express our problem. And if we get it wrong, if we don't have the right things in the problem space, or we have too much in the problem space, it changes our answers. Cool. Now this is interesting. No system really operates completely, just a flowing thing. There are feedback loops. And there are two really important types of feedback loops. The first one is the very simple balancing loop. So this goes like as follows. I am cold. I put on my jersey. I feel better. Equilibrium restored. This is in your house. You will turn up your thermostat. Heating works, you are happy. A balancing loop, though, those kind of balancing loops can fail. They may be too weak. So there is a terrible storm, the window's broken, my thermostat can't cope. So it doesn't mean it's perfect. It just means it's always trying to return to equilibrium. The other side, which is the reinforcing loops, that's the holy grail, right? If you're a startup, you want to be the social media company that suddenly finds something that goes viral, right? I mean, horrible modern term, which is essentially a reinforcing loop. I say I enjoy it. You tell your buddy, it's a great app, and they tell their buddy, and next thing, we have 1 million users spending, or 1 billion, or whatever it is, spending all their day on Facebook, and there goes productivity. The other interesting things, if you think about systems and you bring them back to people, for instance, would be something like population growth. So the more people you have, the more babies you have. And that's our overpopulation problems, because now you end up doing something drastic like China years ago and saying, only one-child policy. Because you have to stop the reinforcing loop that says the more people we are, the more people there'll be. So reinforcing loops, of course, are very, very scary when they work the other way around. And I want to talk a little bit about teams and our working environment. If you've got somebody very negative in the team, they can, I don't know why it is, but the negativity brings people down faster than positivity brings people up. So when somebody decides that, life is terrible and it's all so awful, it's quite quick for that to catch on amongst the whole team, and then everybody's moaning. And it's very difficult to turn those around and to get that. So those downward spirals tend to get tighter and tighter, and they get more and more difficult to actually arrest. So I think when you think about systems, if you think about team behavior, it becomes quite interesting to realize that by putting a bunch of people together, you're creating a system of interactions and effects. Okay, so those are the loops. Let's see what else I wanted to do. All right, a little bit more diagramming, and then we're going to practice something. I was really quite keen for people to do a bit of a diagram themselves, just because it's so easy when you see me doing water in, evaporation out. It's a lot more difficult when you start to think about your own boundaries, but we'll try and do it together. So the way we're going to do this is we've got our tap, our cloud, our tap in, our stock, outflow cloud. Then we have a goal for the system. Does this work if I... Yeah, haha. Where's the cat? So what we're saying is the system, we have some goal with it. It may not be what it's doing, but we have a goal, and then there's something a shortfall. And therefore the feedback loop says we'll need more of the inflow, or we'll need more or less of the outflow, right? So you just mark up these things so that you can identify this is what I need more of, or that's what I need less of, and you mark it up like that. So I thought what we would do together is draw a diagram of the factors that influence a team's productivity. All right. Having just said that we shouldn't refer to people as resources, I'm now going to refer to them as stock. All right. Are you ready to try this one with me? So this isn't a right answer, okay? It's just an exercise for the thinking, so you can try this yourself with some of the systems you work with. Okay. I have my stock. We'll make a little team standing around a scrum board or something. Are people here mostly agile practitioners? Who's in agile? Who works in an agile manner? Oh, good. All right, so we're going to have some sort of inflow, and we're going to have some sort of outflow. For the sake of it, I mean, I don't want to sit here waiting for everyone to come up with every possible answer, but is there anybody who'd like to suggest some of the things that could increase our stock of team? Hiring, yeah, absolutely. Cross-functional. Okay, so keeping people. Yes. Alrighty. I put down two things there because we were going to talk about the productivity of the team. Okay. So, and it's just an example, right? But we would have new hires, or we'd bring people in from other departments, however it is, we'd add people. But we also reduce the effectiveness of our people through our policies. So let's say my organizational policy is that we're going to now have a 50-hour week. Now, I know nobody says that, but they damn well do it. There are a lot of companies that, if you're there late, well, you're a jolly good chap, right? I mean, you're putting in the extra effort. And there's an unstated policy that rewards non-sustainable behavior. Or the organizational policy might be to reduce leave. Well, that does increase the capacity of the team. But I'll take you a bet, it drops the motivational levels. So we're playing with what can we do on the one side to increase productivity, and what reduces it will be the impact of those things. It's a simplistic example, right? Yeah, so keeping the people. I've got resignations. Right, so what would the goal be? I said, productivity. How about working software? I'll use a nice agile term for that one. So then the discrepancies could be we're getting less software than expected, whatever that means, or it's of a low quality. So I guess we could say then that on input ought to be training. So as you follow through the idea of, I don't want to press the wrong button here, or that one, you could maybe say we should add some more inputs. We're going to need to not just hire people, we should actually skill them up. And eventually you're going to get to a point where you start going, well, but that's not our responsibility anymore, because your scope gets too wide. But I like this example just because I feel people, and almost everybody in corporate has the same thing of it's so difficult sometimes to do your job. So why do we design our systems like that? Why do we design our working systems in a manner that makes it difficult to do our jobs? Why do we make people feel miserable? I've got a pet hate which says, why do you see people coming in on a Monday like, it's work, and then on a Friday, it's Friday? I mean, are we wasting our lives? I would really love to enjoy what I do every single day, which is probably why I went and started my own business. It certainly cuts down a certain level of that, right? Yeah, and then you become unemployable. That's the next thing that happens. But yeah, I mean, I love the one as well about if we're getting less software than we expected, and then someone says, well, we could always increase the team size. Yeah, mythical man month. I mean, there we go. If one woman takes 9 months to make one baby, then it'll take. Okay, let's stop talking about people. Let's talk about something simpler. I'm going to go through another little diagram. Let's talk about car sales, right? Because that's a nice. This isn't the nicest ever diagram, so I'll give you a moment to try and read it. It's a bit furry and it's a bit old. It's just as an example of a system. We have a stock of cars. So we're a car salesman. No comments about that. We get deliveries of new cars onto our lot. We sell them, hopefully, and stay in business. We have some or other desired inventory, right? I mean, we don't want to have no cars to sell, and we don't want to have too many cars on the lot. There's a typical typical Goldilocks problem. So, are my terms right? You all know what that one means? You remember at the porridge that was too cold, and then the porridge that was too hot, but then the porridge must be just right. So there's a lot of things in our design life is about that. Not too much, not too little. It's always decisions, right, that we're making. And I think that these diagrams help to show those decisions and where the taps go quite nicely. So we know we've got a desired inventory. Now let us say we get a new model arrives, and it really sells well. So within the first weekend, we had 3 sales. Normally it takes us, we only get a sale a weekend. So the salespeople are thinking about their commission, and they're all pretty hyped, and they say, that was a good weekend. Next weekend, they get 5 sales. And now suddenly they're running out of cars. Now somebody says, oh, I don't know, is this a fluke or is it a trend? Right. So you have to make decisions. So the manager says, don't worry, I'll order more cars. I'll put in a double order, Or maybe he goes conservative. I'll increase it by 10%. But there's a delay. The cars don't arrive immediately. They arrive with a delay. So basically with this slide, we're dealing with this idea that we've got delays in our models. And what do we do about that, and what does it cause? Okay, because any good model ought to bring time into it. So if you're ever doing any modeling and you haven't thought of time, then it ought to be one of our checklist things, right? How does time affect everything? And the problem in systems thinking that we identify is oscillation. So it's overreaction. And this is also the tendency of systems, is to overreact. Because as humans, we make flawed decisions. So we go, oh, the sales are going amazingly. Let's get more cars. Oh, shoot. Okay, it's settled after the initial excitement of the new model. It's now settled down to a different pace of sales. So now I've got too many. It's okay, I won't order next time. Oh, my goodness, now I've run out again. And the more we overreact, the worse the oscillations get. All right. So we have too many people, we fire people. We have too few people. Don't organizations just constantly go through this cycle? Never quite get it right. All right. How do you fix that?
Decrease delays.
So that would be one. So the answer given was to decrease the delays. If you can, of course, that's great, because you would take out the buffering. People try often to order more often. In fact, you usually make it worse if you increase your pace. You almost want to slow it down, and that'll smooth things out. So I don't know particularly on these cars, but your general systems thing is, if you've got an oscillating problem, would be to find out how you could have enough to smooth it and get a better trend so that you can pace yourself better. So a little bit like that overtime problem. Until we figure out a way to do sustainable pace, we're always going to be too tired, putting bugs into the software, and then having to do crazy overtime when it goes live. Yeah? Okay. What else did I want to tell you about this one? Okay. So the next piece I'm going to talk to you about, did you have a...
Yeah, just decrease batch size.
Decrease, if you can, right?
I was going to add speed up the feedback cycles.
Yeah.
You can learn faster that you're going to have a problem and you can react faster, don't have the oscillation.
So if you couldn't hear it, it's pretty much the same. We were just saying if we can decrease delays, that will help us a lot. But yeah, there's different constraints in different systems. So now let's talk about something called systems archetypes. Okay, so what we're talking about here is patterns that recur over and over. All right, sometimes people talk about systems traps, but they're just as much opportunities. Okay, so an archetype might be, and we get the reading right, we might in our modern business speak say something like this. We'd say, a system with multiple pathways and redundancies is more stable than one with low diversity, right? Which is the same as the old English saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Does that make sense? I don't know if that saying works in German. I don't know if you have the same thing about all the eggs in one basket. Just meant, you could break everything at once. So an awful lot of our old sayings actually sum up systems behavior. Sometimes when we talk about these particular archetypes and you think about it, it's actually something you know intuitively in your gut you grew up with. So let's look at a couple. They're quite fun. Policy resistance. So we come up with this brand new scheme and we're going to implement it in our team, and we don't understand why people are not as excited as we are as management. Or the common complaint about something like SAFE, which is imposed on teams. It's a corporate decision. And very, very often you're going to get policy resistance. The example I put up as a slide is that it is a very American example. It says we've had a war on drugs for, 50 years. I don't know how long they've been going on about the war on drugs in America. Has it got any better? No, it just takes more and more money every single year. And it's because there are people who are already hooked, right? So they need the drug. Therefore, they go underground. Therefore, there's more money to be made for the supplier because it's a risky business. But, higher margins attract more sellers. So the net effect here is to have more people trying to sell and hook more people who have to buy. And the more money you push into the whole thing, the more the profits go up, basically. Okay, that's policy resistance. This is, again, with a little bit of a South African example. We kept referring to day zero, which is the day that our city was going to run out of water, which eventually scared everybody into behaving. And the prospect of actually queuing with our little 20-litre drum, for water, we were like, oh my goodness me, this was scary. So the tragedy of the commons, the term comes from the idea that you have a common field, was the original thing. The common in English would have been, you had your village and your cow used to graze on the field and the neighbor's cow grazed on the same field. And then somebody went like, oh, there's a nice big field, I'll get 2 cows. And the other guy went, oh, Bill got 2 cows, I'll get another 2 cows myself. Next thing, your field is used up. And the point was we had a shared resource, but we didn't have the same pain, basically, to abusing it until it was all used up. So the tragedy of the commons is that people tend to be selfish and they will keep on using for their own benefit. And ultimately, you have to say that is human nature. We are selfish. We're always looking for our own benefit. You may as well acknowledge that in your systems thinking. Everyone's going to be going, what's in it for me? So we almost used up our water until we got really scared and then suddenly realized, can't go on using it. I always try and give people a moment to read the joke. Drift to low performance. It's also a very interesting archetype. The way I see it working in business quite often is that we don't have the returns we were expecting. And so we make excuses. We say, oh, the economy, it's tanking. It's really terrible. We did okay given the circumstances. And once you allow yourself to make excuses for your performance, then you drift lower and lower. Next year, the bar will be a little lower. And I think we do set up systems to expect the least eventually. We eventually agree that, with 100 developers on the team, all that you can get out is a certain pace of delivery. And in fact, we slow ourselves down all the time because we expect less and less, because the last time, we did something, we had mistakes and errors, so let's expect less and we won't be as disappointed. And it's also human behavior. But, could you tell? The archetype is called success to the successful. It says that we set up our systems as well to reward those who are already successful. So the nice example is, let's say you've got a bunch of children, they compete in a tennis tournament, and the winning child wins a coaching contract. So the winning child is now going to get coached for the next season. Will that child win again? Well, unless everybody else can afford the coaching contract and come up, the person who won is in a better position next time to continue to win and to continue to, get the benefits of that. So that's a little bit of a reinforcing loop as well, right? So the common saying is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Because, once you've reached a certain level, you can invest your money, and therefore the grocery shopping, do you know that if you're poor and you have to buy in small quantities, you're usually buying at the highest unit price. So your money doesn't go as far because you couldn't buy the bigger size and keep it because you didn't have the money to do that. So you're always behind. And I'm trying to think what we do. This was a little comic that just talked about people and privilege, because why not? If I've got a platform, we can always talk about privilege. But we do that in Africa a lot. We talk about wanting to make things equal. But you have to sometimes recognize that some people just start off 2 steps higher up on the ladder, And you've got to acknowledge that. So we have something called affirmative action, which says that as employers, we're supposed to look out and give priority to normally black-skinned people, which in our case would be colored or black, or, which sits badly because now you have to categorize everybody. But you have to recognize that we have a disadvantaged society. And it's no good just saying, well, let's not see that anymore. We've got to give a few people a hand up. So I'm actually positive about those activities, so long as you keep the end goal in mind, which is to get them up to the second step of the ladder where you're sitting. Right. Here's a nice one for developers. It's a long title, Shifting the Burden to the Intervener. And I've used a hero for this because I've worked in so many teams that have had a hero developer, and I hate them. I'm really sorry if you're the ace guy on your team, because unless you're actively mentoring, you're probably stopping other people getting better. Okay, and what happens in systems language, we talk about the self-maintaining capacity of the system erodes. So if you have a good mentoring environment, you can bring new people in. You remember that new hires didn't blaming help us if they sit in the corner and never get to learn it, or if every time we've got to work on that special piece of code, only Joe can do it. Yeah. So we design our systems like that. We reward these guys. No, Joe's good. Let Joe do it. So if you're working in an environment like that, think about how are you contributing to not leaving your team in a position where they're capable of continuing. I mean, I firmly believe in always working myself out of a job. It's the only way you can go up, isn't it? Yeah. A couple more. Rule beating. So I follow the rules, but not the intent. Isn't this called KPIs? Do you guys have those things? I will get this little thing done. It doesn't matter if it should be done or not. The picture is we've taken racing to a point where it's all about the last bit of the rule. It's not even a boat anymore. You know, the damn thing doesn't even sit in the water, really. It's almost flying, but it's within the rules, right? and actually, we often think that's good, but it's a type of rule beating. We seek the wrong goals. That's the other side of that one. Confusing effort was output. Let me think of what else did I want to talk to you about on this one. That's really it. I mean, these are obvious, right? I almost want to go back to a slide I thought I wouldn't cover because I can see I've got a little bit of time. Something we haven't talked about, because I'm pretty much at the end of my archetypes now, is something about renewable stocks. So our team, to some extent, is renewable. I mean, unless you, I don't know, really absolutely kill their motivation, they're you know, and even then, it's a renewable resource, right? We could take them on some team building and we could, you know, fix the stupid policies and people will gradually recover and start being able to work. Let's take something like fishing. So we have fishing stock in the ocean. I actually do have a slide. I just wonder if I can, do you mind if I go and get it for you? So I wasn't going to show it, but we have time. How does this work? Escape. Yes. I don't know. Will it come up? If it's hidden. I'm going to unhide it. Will that do it? All right. So this was a horrible little picture, but I just wanted to talk about the renewable stock thing because it's an important diagramming thing as well. So this one, we've got two different stocks. We have capital at the top and we've got the resource at the bottom, which in this case is our fish. The capital says I have a fishing fleet, right? And the more money I make fishing, the more money I can put into the fleet. Okay, so you can see where this is going, hopefully by now. So we've got investment. We have a growth goal. Unless, our ships sink, really all that happens to them is they depreciate. Occasionally you have to write one off. And we do something stupid. But mostly, we have this asset, we have our factory, we have our machinery, we have whatever it is, and we just keep investing to stay ahead of depreciation. We have a goal of profit. Now, initially, there are lots and lots of fish. So the more we fish, funnily enough, it almost helps the system because we had a lot of fish, so they were limited probably by their food. So we start thinning down the fish. And you know what? They actually regenerate faster. There's more food for them. Maybe we've killed some of their predators at the same time, you know. So this is the thing. You think it's just now your fish go down, but for a little while it looks like fish go up the more you fish. This is great. We'll buy some more boats, right? But in renewable resources, there's a tipping point. So you get to the tipping point, and we talk about the regeneration rate, where at some point there are now not enough fish to make more fish. And at some point, the renewable resource effectively becomes a non-renewable resource. And this works for oil. This works for anything that we just keep using up. And I know it's not exactly DDD or whatever, but it's this thing of how do we, as people working with systems, think about the broader impact of what we're doing and the world that we live in. So I'm just covering all of systems theory for you. Is there anything else I wanted to tell you about this one? Okay, that's fine. So seeing as we're back here, I'll just quickly renew this one. It was policy resistance, tragedy of the commons, drift to low performance, the rich get richer, the hero that does more harm than good because you leave the team unable to work, bending the rules, and the wrong goal. So I wanted to just put a slide up about Trump's wall. And I thought it might be relevant to people who've just managed to get rid of their own wall not too many decades ago. So the Americans have this thing at the moment that they want to put a wall up between Mexico and America. And yeah, if you know how, I don't know if this is an up-to-date figure, but the last one I saw was, I think it would cost something like 33 billion was a figure I saw. I don't think the figure matters particularly. It's the waste, right? Doesn't everyone feel that in their gut? That, you know, like, would you really spend all of that on this wall? So the interesting part of the systems thinking, and I'm sort of check the name, it was Jimmy Carter. So how many years ago was Jimmy Carter president? Oh. Yeah, a hell of a long time ago. Sorry for those who are too young to remember. Luckily, there's a few of us who do. He was actually quite a wise president. Way back then, he said, how about we take all the money we spend on border patrol, border security, and we invest it in Mexico? Can you imagine what you could do for the economy of Mexico with 33 billion? How many schools you could build, how many hospitals, how many businesses could be started, so that the Mexicans didn't want to come to America anymore? In fact, I mean, at the moment with Trump there, I think a lot of Americans are thinking of going to Mexico. But isn't that what you guys did with East Germany and West Germany? Was there had to be a lot of investment. Otherwise, you had such inequality that it would overwhelm the one system. So this is the balancing loop. It says, at some point, the feedback, it's too weak to cope, and you have to act in the system until you can reach equilibrium again. So although it's weird to think you should go and invest in somebody else, it can be to your long-term benefit. Yeah. And that was pretty much most of what I wanted to tell you. If you're really interested in getting more information on this, I really recommend this little book. It's called Thinking in Systems, a Primer. Even though it's and it was written by this amazing lady called Donella Meadows, who died just before it was published, and then I think it was published posthumously. But it's a really, really great resource for just making you think, right? Just thinking about how all these things, how our life fits together. So the core things we've talked about, it's intuition versus analysis. And instead of only breaking your problem down into small and smaller pieces, try and step back, try and take a view that says, holistically, what is my bigger problem? And if we're talking about teams, and you're one of those people working in one of those desperately unhappy teams, you can do things like think about, well, what is the work environment I want? How could we get there despite the policies? Or my favorite one at the moment, and I'll just use the minute or two to pontificate on it, is people who tell me, developers who tell me how horrible the code is they work on. And I'm like, well, why don't you fix it? Oh, we never get time for that, or we're not allowed to. But I think you need to really think about the system you work in, because we all end up working on code we don't like, even if it was our own code. I don't like my code from 10 years ago. That'd be silly. So we have to create a new system in our minds that says, what is my job? My job as a developer is to constantly improve everything I touch. Boy Scout rule, huh? Leave the campsite cleaner than you found it. In our case, it's a method or a line of code. And just do a little bit of cleanup while you're there. I mean, my favorite thing of all of DDD is actually ubiquitous language. Just because, I mean, if you don't get that, I mean, that's so simple to understand. How many people have worked with users who said, well, you must just put the value there. And you say, well, what is a value? In this case, it's this times a VAT amount. And until you all agree that the term you wanted was invoice value, it could have been any value. It could have been cost value. It could have been... So, I mean, I love that. Because it's good for the users too. That rigor just brings everybody up a notch. Okay. And then the boundaries constrain the problem. What are we thinking about? Are we in the right place? So whatever you're battling with, whatever it is, that was how it was designed, even if it was not how it was intended. So be brave and courageous about redesigning your systems, and I really mean like refactor your code. If you want to take it down to a simple thing for this group, as soon as we're probably not going to be making decisions about our governments and our economies. But you can still do this in the systems you work in. And that's me. We take questions.
Do you use this stock and flow mapping in your daily work?
The question being, do I use the stock and flow drawings? So I would do this sort of thing at a more macro level. You know, for me, it's having... So sometimes for me, the picture's in my head as well, by the way, because I'm not going to sit there necessarily drawing little taps. I just wanted to give you some tools. If you're really battling with an intractable problem that says, how could I think about what comes in, what goes out, the quantities of it, you know, and you use that as you could. I think we don't do it enough. There's another sideline to that about design, because in Agile, we talk a lot about emergent design, okay? Just enough design. And I'm a very, very big fan of XP, because I think that a lot of what we do in Agile, especially Scrum and all these things, it does not support the developer at all. The principles that actually help develop systems come from XP. And emergent design comes from XP. But the phrase there, the way it was put together, it said, because change is relatively cheap, you can do the design as late as possible. But the important part was because change is cheap. I mean, if you're designing a system that is not going to be easy to change, you'd better design it all up front. You know, if you're dealing with something that's got, you know, interfaces to other people, and once that's set in concrete, kind of, you can't change it, well, then do the design properly. So I see Agile people too often going, oh, no, we don't have to design anymore. Just my other little side on that one. Any other questions? Well, I thank you very much for listening to me.